everyone. My name is Karen Berman, and I'm the CEO of the American Society of the University of Haifa. Thank you for joining us today. The study of Jewish history seeks to understand the events and processes that shape and continue to shape the Jewish people. It provides the foundation and perspective with which we approach and analyze contemporary Jewish and Israeli cultures. Because Jewish history cannot be fully explored or appreciated without considering the rich and varied tapestry of culture and historical content, the University of Haifa's Department of History takes an interdisciplinary approach, considering social, economic, political, and intellectual influences that have impacted history from biblical times to our present day. Today's discussion will explore Jewish life in pre-Holocaust Poland. We are fortunate to be joined by Professor MARCOS SILBER and University of Haifa Board of Governors member and longtime ASUH friend and supporter Michael Traison. Professor Silber is an associate professor of Jewish modern history in the Department of Jewish History and chairman of the Gotteiner Institute for the History of the Bund and the Jewish Labor Movement at University of Haifa. His research focuses on Eastern European Jewish history with an emphasis on Polish Jewish history. He has written on Jewish Diaspora Nationalism, Yiddish and Polish mass culture in interwar Poland, and on Polish-Israeli relations and mutual migrations. Michael Traison is a partner at Cullen and Dykman LLP in the firm's Bankruptcy and Creditors' Rights Department. In the practice, Michael maintains a special focus on Israel, Poland, and Eastern Europe, and has appeared before courts throughout the United States, Poland, and Israel. Michael also serves as Executive Vice President of the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, and has 3 decades of experience focused on the preservation of Polish Jewish heritage. Before I turn everything over to Michael and to Professor Silber, I just want to note that during their presentation, if you have any questions, you can put them on the chat function and we'll get to them, or you can email them to info@asuh.org. Thank you again for joining us today for what I'm sure will be a fascinating discussion. And with that, Michael, I turn it over to you and to Professor Silber.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you very much. And good morning from Chicago, and good afternoon and good evening from Israel, where our friend MARCOS SILBER is sitting now. Happy to have you together with us. Our program today is going to be approximately 35 minutes of discussion, followed by questions and answers. As Karen has indicated, please do feel free to send in those questions and answers. We may even interrupt MARCOS from time to time with some of those. Before talking about Poland, I'd like to talk a little bit about the University of Haifa. I am on the Board of Governors, and I've been involved with the university for a number of years now, directly, but even indirectly, going back a long time ago, maybe 53 years ago, I first saw the university on the mountaintop in Haifa, and it's an unusual place. The university itself is unique in several respects. One of them is that it is serving the north of Israel. The center of Israel, easily accessible, has some great universities, obviously. This is a university that serves a student body and needs in a particularly important part of Israel, in Israel's north, all the way up to the borders. In addition, it sits almost at the edge of the sea. In fact, now it does sit at the edge of the sea with the downtown campus, and takes advantage of that position to be able to get involved in a lot that has to do with marine science and the naval base that's located there. The university is a place you should definitely go to see if you haven't seen it already. And many of you on this call, I'm sure, have been frequent visitors to Israel. Let us invite you to have an intimate tour of the campus. The next time you go, contact me or the ASUH office. I am particularly fond of Israel because, I'm fond of the university in terms of Israel because I think it really is the heart and soul of the country. The Zionist dream, a country that is diverse, a country that is the nation state of the Jewish people, but a country of all of its people, all of its citizens. And this is represented at the university very well by the student body. The university has, I think, the largest percentage of Arab, of Christian and Muslim students of any university, undergraduate or graduate program. Lots of reasons to go see the school, and I hope that you will. Because of those connections, I was able to meet our guest today, Professor MARCOS SILBER, and we've asked him to talk about a subject that I think is very important to people. Anytime we do a program on Poland, we're used to having people say, well, my parents came from there, or my grandparents, or my roots are there. And that's not surprising, because 90% of the Jews of the United States, for example, probably have their roots in what was once Poland. And at least it's estimated 80% of the Jews of the whole world, including the Sephardic world, can trace their roots back to what was once Poland. In the Torah, more than once, it says, remember, do not forget. Do not forget is a phrase that we hear very often from people, especially with regard to the destruction of the Jewish civilization that once lay in Poland. But I think it's important not to say don't forget, because you cannot forget something you never knew. And to know and to remember is the other part of that admonition in the Torah. And part of what we're doing today, ladies and gentlemen, is to talk about subjects that people may not be so familiar with. Everything is about context when we're discussing these subjects. And I want to introduce Professor Silber's remarks by talking about context in terms of geography and in terms of time. And of course, because these remarks are limited, they're going to be oversimplifications, and we could have a very interesting extended discussion, I'm sure. So like a good lawyer, I'm qualifying what I'm about to say by saying that it's more complex than I'm going to present it as, but it's important to remember that the years we're talking about, the interwar years, were at a time when Poland had its independence, from around the end of the World War I until the Germans invaded in September of 1939. Before then, Poland was occupied territory. Three different empires: the Prussian Empire in the northern and the far western areas, the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the southern area, what we refer to as Galicia or Mała Polska, and of course the Russian Empire, which dominated a large part of the Kingdom of Poland. Cities like Warsaw were in Russia. Ben-Gurion, you could say he was born in Poland, but you really would be talking about the fact he was born in Płonsk. When he was born, it was the Kingdom of Poland, the land of Poland, but it was the Empire of Russia. So we need to remember, first of all, that politically, we're talking about a period of time after the Versailles Treaty when Poland regained its independence. Regained it because it had been occupied all that time, back to 1795, after three partitions had taken place. And I'm mentioning this because the differences in Poland are kind of like the differences in the United States. We could not use one phrase to describe the Mississippi Delta and Times Square in Manhattan. It would be equally wrong to try to summarize all of Poland with one phrase. The influences of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, politically, architecturally, are manifest in a different way in southern Poland than you would see in other parts. It's a big country. And it was even a bigger country. Before the Germans invaded and the Russians invaded 17 days later from the east, Poland extended much further than it does today. It included large parts of Lithuania, large parts of what is today Ukraine, and Belarus, and other areas. But if you go back to Jagiellonian Poland, the Empire of Poland, which existed a long time before that, you could say that Poland stretched from the gates of Kiev all the way to the west, to where Germany is today, and it stretched from the Baltic Sea all the way almost down to Odessa. Many places that your parents, grandparents, and your ancestors came from, which you may think of in terms of Russia, or you may think of it in terms of Ukraine or Belarus, they were actually Poland at one time. So it gives us a little bit of the feel for the geography. Now, the second part is the time. We must remember the time that we're talking about. In the 1920s, of course, in Germany, there was the Weimar Republic. There was also a democracy in Poland, but there was a heavy influence in the 1930s from right-wing parties. People that we heard from here in the U.S., like Father Coughlin or Townsend and others who were making Henry Ford making statements that were rather objectionable, rather to the right, and rather xenophobic. They had their counterparts in Poland as well. There was a leader in Poland who lived until 1935. His name was Pilsudski. I don't think most of us would describe him as a liberal, but he certainly had a vision that was more tolerant than other people did. But when he died and the Indecia party came into power, we can see many of the stories emerging that our parents and grandparents told us about. The student benches, the backbenches, the discrimination, the boycotts. In some ways, as you'll hear, Poland represented a very right-wing and a very xenophobic approach during those latter years of the 1930s toward the Jews. But remember, what was going on next door in Germany was even worse, far more worse, in fact, incomparably worse. And at the same time, in Hungary, also very strong difficulties that made the Polish experience that our ancestors may have spoken about seem rather light in comparison. Well, that's some of the background, and I'd like to turn this over for a discussion with Professor Silber now. Marcos, I hope if there's anything I stated that you disagree with, you'll say so.
So, thank you, Karen, and thank you, Michael, for introducing this broad context. In order to maybe illustrate that this long process you summarized so well in a few short minutes, I will share with you some maps to try to understand this process of the partitions of Poland. I hope that do you see them?
Yes. Yes. Good.
Okay. And this map is a map in three colors, in this red, green, and blue colors, are representing the Polish Republic at the end of the 18th century. As you mentioned, this big and important country in 18th century Europe. It was the third by size and the third country by its population. It was divided during the late 18th century in three different occasions between the three neighbors of this country: Russia, Prussia, which will become later Germany, and the Habsburg Empire, what will be later on Austro-Hungary. That is in the late 19th century. In the late 19th century, that means this old, well-established, very important country in Europe disappeared completely from the map. It was erased completely. It was no Poland at the end of the 18th century. The different territories of the ex-Poland were part of the three growing empires in the region. Russia in the east, the Habsburg Empire, later Austro-Hungary in the south, and in the west, Prussia, or later on Germany. But during the first part of the 19th century, in three different occasions, it was these borders were shaped and reshaped one and again, time and again. What made the geopolitical situation very unstable? As I mentioned often to my students, somebody was born in wars in one place in Poland, who as a child he grew up in Prussia. He was a young adult in Austro-Hungary, and an adult in Russia, and he never changed his address. That means that the only stable parameter in the life of somebody who experienced his life in the first part of the 19th century, or the first half of the 19th century, was his own origin. I am emphasizing that because in this region, it developed a kind of, I would say, a identity that we historians called ethno-national. That means that what framed his belonging was not the state where they are living, was not the state who gave them some kind of belonging later on in citizenship, because it was very unstable. The states changed all the time. The official language changed all the time. The legal framework changed all the time. The currency changed all the time. That means the only thing that was stable was your family, your origin, maybe your spoken language at home. That it was one of the elements on the base of the developing of this ethno-national ethnic identity, and made possible to talk with concepts that maybe are very, very unusual in the West and in North America. That we are talking about Poles and Jews, when Poles, so-called, and Jews, so-called, were all of them citizens of the Polish state, when this Polish state was re-established after more than 120 years in 11 November 1918, at the end of World War I. And then Jews were citizens of this Polish state.
Marcos,
yeah.
May I interrupt you one moment? Before you delve further in this particular graphic, you talked about Jews, you talked about citizens, you talked about Poles. To American ears, the idea of Jewish is associated simply with religion. And there's no contradiction between being American and being Jewish. But frequently we do see in the language that we use a difference between being Jewish and being Polish. Can you address that a little bit, why that concept makes sense to some people?
Yeah, that is a point I try to emphasize. During the 19th century, when this Polish state did not exist, the only thing that existed were these ethnic belonging, which in many cases were related to religion, because during the 19th century developed the concept that the Jews by religion are Jews by ethnic belonging. That, let's say, Catholic people by religion are mainly Poles, bad ethno-national definition. That people, Orthodox people or Pravoslav people are mainly Russian by their belonging. And this was, of course, combined with another point, that the spoken language of the different groups was different and developed into different language, into the different, which it's called literary languages or cultural languages. And this spoken language, which we call Polish as the normative language, was developed slowly when some of the main dialects in the region was adopted by growing people. The language, the spoken language by the vast majority of the Jews in the 19th century in this region was Yiddish. It developed into a normative language that was spoken by this particular group we called Jews. In the absence of a country that integrates the population and gives them equal participation in the country, without taking into account their, let's say, religious belonging, or their confession, or their ethnic origin, or the language that they spoke. This peculiar phenomenon of ethno-national consciousness, the ethnic awareness of these individuals, developed in this region. I would say, if I would say shortly, and in order to make it more clear, in the absence of a state entity that tried to create the citizen of the state as the main parameter of belonging of the individual to the state, developed this ethnic consciousness that allowed the option of being ethnically or nationally Jewish, but citizen of the Polish state. Pole by nationality, and citizen of the Polish state, as two different categories. It is interesting because in English we use the word nationality to define the belonging to the state, and to define the belonging of this I would say very subjective belonging of the individual that relates himself to somebody that maybe is not part, or he is not his co-citizen. In Slavic language, as well in Hebrew, we have two different terms. You have the one term, one word to say citizen, or belong, this equal belonging to the states, the belonging that gives you right to some rights or to civil rights in the state, and another word, completely another word, to say you are related to some group of people that maybe have a mythical origin. And that's a really particular phenomenon that always is hard to understand in the West, probably in Israel, because in some way we are a very Polish state, it is easier to understand. And of course, it created this dichotomy that allows us to speak about Poles and Jews, something that it is even unthinkable in France to say. You never talk about French and Jews when you are talking about French Jews. That is an important question, an important point, because when the Polish state was created, and you know, many other countries were created in Eastern Europe, countries where the ethnic belonging was really important to mark your relation to the state.
So Joanna Michlik has a book called Poland's Threatening Other.
Yeah.
And her focus is that for Poles traditionally, at least in the period we're talking about, that the Jews were looked at as the other, as aliens, as something that really might be a visitor, might have rights of a citizen, but belong to some other world.
Yeah, you're referring to Joanna Michlik's book, which is a very important book. She traces along the ages, during these long 19th and 20th centuries, the construction of the Jew and the aids of many, I would say, important trends in the Polish national movement, many times the hegemonic trends in the Polish national movement, that related to the Jews as others, not ours, but them, as the creation of the Jew as an is related to the state, but not fully belonging to the state. And because of that, because the Polish state was shaped as Lithuanian, as Hungary in the interwar period, as many other countries in this period, and also after World War II, that were created for a specific group, that a specific ethno-national group was the entitled nation, the group that deserved special rights, or the group that the state should serve first.
Marcos, I just want to remind our viewers that they should continue to send in questions, and we'll interrupt you, and we'll have some at the end, but people should be reminded to send in questions. And you're doing a great job of addressing the question of Poles' view of Jews, and I expect you're now going to get into the Jewish view of themselves in Poland. Did they feel part of the Polish nation or part of the Polish state?
Yeah, I think that one more point that I would like to point out, in order to understand the otherness of the Jews in Poland, is that when you are, I am relating to this table and this particular map I hope that you are seeing on screen, the demographic situation or demographic profile of the Jews in Poland was exactly the opposite of the average of the entire picture of the population in Poland. As you can see in this pie, while 70% or 3/4 of the population in Poland was rural, 7.7%.
Yeah.
And the urban population was 1/4 of the entire population of Poland. The situation of the Jewish population was completely the opposite.
Yeah.
3/4 of the Jewish population was urban, and only 1/4 was.
In fact, the urban population, if we look at the big cities, the 6 big cities, ranged between 26% Jewish in Krakow to 33% in Warsaw and in other cities. So a huge urban population.
And you can see that exactly that, because of the Jewish profile was an urban profile, and the general profile was rural. We can see how prominent was the Jewish population in the cities. In this particular map, in these small pies, you can see the percentage of the Jewish population in the different regions according to rural or to urban. You can see that in the west and the central Poland, you can see that the absolute majority of the Jews were urban people. But in these cities, the Jews were a minority. While in the east, the rural Jewish population was bigger, it was higher than in other places and other regions of Poland. The Jewish presence in the cities was huge. For instance, while in Poznan, the Jewish percentage was less than 10%, Poznan, one of the biggest cities in Poland. In Pinsk, 75% of the population, of the city population, was Jewish. While in Warsaw, 1/3 of the population was Jewish. In Białystok, half of the population was Jewish. We can see this of course, 1/3 of the population of the biggest city in Poland, Warsaw, or 1/3 of the population, the second biggest city in Poland, which is of course important and very visible, especially because of the location of the Jewish neighborhoods. But that made the Jewish population in the cities very different to the average Polish population. That it is
Marcos, what about professions? What about the professions?
That is reflected, of course, in the professional profile of the Jews. While 70% of the population in Poland was rural, among the Jews, people dealing with agriculture was 10%. While a fraction of the Jews deal, or I would say in another way, while a fraction of the general population work on industry or commerce, almost 65% of the Jewish population worked on commerce or industry that are, of course, urban occupations. That made the profile of the Jews very different of the average profile of the population. Of course, made the question of, let's say, taxes. Who pays taxes, and how high are the taxes in the different economic frames or occupations? Also, a question that was related in some way to the question of ethnic origin. If you are taxing more the agriculture, you are taxing more the Christian Polish population. If you are taxing more the industry and the commerce, you are taxing more the Jews than other population. That marked many aspects with, let's say, with some ethnic color. Every aspect was related to some economic color. Every aspect was related with some of also cultural color, because while 70% of the population in Poland, or 66% of the population in Poland declared Polish as their mother tongue. Among the Jews, around 70% of the Jewish population, even more, declared Yiddish as their mother tongue. That means that, of course, made the Jewish population in Poland different than the average general population, emphasizing this otherness. You wanted to ask or make some remark?
Yeah, I think we should also focus on the fact that expression in these senses of what language you spoke might have also been directed by people's wish to manifest themselves politically. That this would, why don't you explain that a bit?
Yeah, you are completely right. And of course, the question is, when you are talking about your mother tongue, what are you talking about? Yeah, and what is the importance of mother tongue? Maybe more important is not your mother tongue, but the language you are using in your everyday life. The question, this concept of mother tongue was completely interpreted in different ways by different people because maybe of their historical experience. The more important question in the Austro-Hungarian census, that means in this southern part of Poland that was in the before 1918 part of the Austrian-Hungary, that the Habsburg Empire acquired from Poland, they were let's say, they used to declare about not mother tongue but the language of daily use was the question in the census on Austria-Hungary, and many people answered when they asked them what is your mother tongue. They answered about the daily use, the language of their daily use. But because of the political implications of the declaration of your mother tongue, many people declared in purpose some some declarative statement. For instance, no doubt about it's no doubt that 250,000 people declaring in 1931 that Hebrew is their mother tongue is completely
Impossible.
completely impossible. And most of the historians, and I agree in this point, consider that most of those declaring Hebrew as their mother tongue, they are declaring their belonging or their support to the Zionist project. And most of them use Polish as their language, and of course their mother tongue, because when before the census were a propagandistic struggle in the public in general and among the Jews in particular, which language you should declare. In Polish, for Polish Jewish readers of Polish Jewish journals, they explain them the Jewish reader of a Polish journal that he should declare Polish as his Hebrew as his mother tongue. השפה הלאומית של העם היהודי, השפה העברית. The national language of the Jewish people is the Hebrew language. That means the declaration of this language, this of mother tongue, it was completely a political question.
This is fascinating. We're getting questions. Let me interrupt you a second for a question. One question which wants you to stop at this point and really go back and clarify. Poles saw Jews as Poles, or they saw them as Jews? Can you address that a little bit more? Was it, the questioner asked, was it because of the language difference? I think you need to spend just a minute more on that subject, at least.
What I am trying to emphasize with pointing out to this very different profile is to try to contextualize this otherness. What I am trying to say is many times, very often, and probably rightly, we interpret this labeling of other as anti-Semitic. But in many cases, it is showing us that the general perception of the differences between the general Polish or let's say general public and the specificity of the Jewish population. And needless to say, Jews also emphasize their being other to the Polish nation. That doesn't mean less with less rights. That doesn't mean that somebody who belongs to another group but being citizen of the same country should have less rights. In this framework developed the question of minority rights, or
Marcos, in Germany as well as in Hungary, over the course of the 20th century for sure, until the war, there had been a lot of assimilation. In Germany and Hungary, there was conversions. People viewed the religion of the state as just being a formality, being part of the state, being a citizen. And we developed even our religious practices, became more quote-unquote progressive, or what we call in the States reform or conservative. What about in Poland? Was there assimilation, and were there changes in religious observance?
I think I would like to maybe answer to two questions that I see that are also on the table or formulated by the public. One is the question, this question of you are presenting the question of of the assimilation as one of somebody in our audience, Adi Nevo, is talking about poles of Moses' faith. A concept that it is important. It is related with what we call assimilation. I would say that in this way, as this concept of poles of mosaic faith developed especially around the 60s of the 19th century. Probably it reached its zenith in the 90s of the 19th century, but with the growing appeal of nationalism, ethnic nationalism, this separation of the groups that are talking as we the Poles and you the Jews, this concept of poles of mosaic faith was collapsing. In the interwar period, while in 1919 was really at the end of this project was at its end, but we can still find people that define themselves as poles of mosaic faith. In the 20s and the 30s, this kind of definition was collapsing. It may be in the baluard of in the institutional baluard of this group was the great synagogue in Tumacka Street in Warsaw. This very visible synagogue, very important institution for Polish Jewry in general, really important in many aspects, and which was created by those people that define themselves as poles of mosaic faith. In the 20s and the 30s, we can see that they are being more and more in the minority. That doesn't mean that they did not saw themselves as no Poles. They saw themselves as Poles and Jews. Poles as a citizen of this country, and Jew by your ethnic belonging. For many, this ethnic belonging was very significant. For many others, it was marginal. But it was present. It was part of this hyphenated definition, being a Polish Jew. And this definition was also shared by Zionists, that they saw themselves as belonging to Poland, equally belonging to Poland as every other citizen of the country, and simultaneously belonging to the Jewish people and supporting the Zionist project in Palestine, and demanding equal rights for the Jews in Poland. We have to remember that most of the Jewish representatives in the Polish parliaments during these 2 decades of the interwar Poland, they identified themselves as Zionists, and the Zionists were a political party with a local agenda, and also supporting the Zionist project in Palestine, but demanding the equal inclusion of the Jews in Poland. Of course, the interpretation of equality was different in the Polish constitution, among Polish nationalists, and among Jews belonging to these Jewish parties.
Marcos, I hate interrupting you, but we've got some questions that we should get quick answers to. We have about 4 minutes here before we have to start doing our closing remarks. As you may have seen on some of these questions, Let me pull up something here. Comment, please. Illiteracy of local rural population versus educated Jews in the cities as to the economic success and involvement in local politics, and how the different levels of literacy may have influenced attitudes toward Jews.
Well, the question of education in Poland is a very important question. We have to remember that between 2/3 to 3/4 of the Jewish children of the Jewish youth attended Polish schools with a very, I would say, marginal Jewish formal education. The magnificent Jewish educational system was attended by, in the best of the cases, 1/3 of the Jewish children, and this is a very, very magnificent educational system with different, completely different educational approaches, Jewish approaches, national approaches, linguistic approaches. Were very heterogeneous, in some way reflecting the heterogeneity of the Jewish population in Poland that maybe I did not emphasize enough. Of course, the question of education and the question of the urban population are related. And we know that Jews try to access education because it was also, as in many other countries, a way to upper mobility, a way to improve your possibilities of success, of insertion in the economic future of the children you are nurturing. That's one point. The second point is that simultaneously, and probably because of that, the proportion of Jews that trying to attend higher education was very high. And slowly, especially in the 30s, the different universities in Poland try to create numerus clausus to limit the inclusion of Jews in the different universities. We have to emphasize something that you emphasized at the beginning. The first country which introduced numerus clausus in Europe was Hungary. And immediately after the creation of the Hungarian Republic after Bela Kun.
I'm sure you would agree that one cannot really understand what was going on in Poland unless they understand what was going on in Hungary and also in Germany at the very same period. You know, Marcos, I know I've cut you off, but before I turn this back over to Karen Berman in New York, I just want to tell you, I could sit and listen to you all day, and I hope I will have that opportunity soon. You've just been tremendous, and it only highlights for me also about the university. I think there needs to be more of an appreciation of what a jewel the University of Haifa is. And the history department and the work you're doing, certainly the robust work you've undertaken, is something that all of us are interested in. So can I thank you, and with apologies for cutting you off, but hopefully we get to continue on another session. I'll turn it over to Karen.
Michael and Professor Silber, thank you so much. And for, Professor Silber, for your comments and for your wisdom, and Michael for your support and engagement and interest in the university. I do want to add, if you still have questions, if anyone out there wants more information, please just email us at info@asuh.org. We're happy to forward your questions on to Professor Silber, or even put you in touch with him directly. See, I'm offering his time without asking him, but we'd love to continue the conversation. As Michael mentioned, and obviously I'm a biased source, but it's really our honor to be able to share this kind of expertise and knowledge. There's so much going on, and so much that's so incredibly relevant, even when it is about Polish history or something that happened, almost 100 years ago. And we appreciate everyone's time and interest in engaging in the topic. I would be remiss in not mentioning that your engagement and your support is particularly appreciated. And if you are so moved to help us out more directly with Marcos's research and with his students, we would appreciate your support. And you can come to our website to donate at asuh.org/donate, or contact any of us directly and we can help you. Other than that, we thank you very much for joining us today. Keep checking our Facebook and website. We'll have several more conversations coming, and we look forward to touching base with all of you directly soon. Wishing you all much good health and a peaceful summer. Thank you so much.